Good morning. This is the Plainsville webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also find this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can get more information and listen to previous shows at our website, which is behind me, blainsworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce uh, my friend and kind of an old-time friend, or not old friend, Kevin James.
Long time friend.
Well, I always forget, like, longtime friend Kevin Jameson. Welcome aboard, Kevin. You can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this.
Hello.
And that is Kevin. And Kevin is also, I love it. Kevin is out of the official Dementia Society of America. It's a studio, recording studio
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We're
in,
live.
in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And Kevin, for the benefit of folks who don't know you, I should mention that Kevin, I knew back when he was a student of mine, back in, what was it, 1932, was it? Or
Yeah,
something?
thereabouts. Thereabouts. Actually, 76. The fall of 76 is when we met.
24, yeah. So all of a sudden, it's a bunch of years. Kevin also, we've stayed in touch ever since he was a student. And Kevin, I guess what, a little over 10 years ago, started the Dementia Society of America. And we'll start it from the basics, Kevin, with respect to the Dementia Society of America. Um, Before that, you as a kid grew up in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I was a born New Yorker, and then my parents moved around a lot, but I always found them. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean that's an oldie but a goodie.
Okay,
But
but I
we
get it.
lived in Jersey, we lived in Massachusetts, we lived in New York. But ultimately, my dad was transferred to a position in Philadelphia, and so my parents moved to this area, and that was in 1970, and stayed ever since.
So when you were growing up in the Doylestown, Pennsylvania area as a kid, did you always know you wanted to head your own nonprofit organization?
I never entered my mind.
Yeah. What did you want to
No.
be as a kid?
Yeah, I wanted to be one of two things, an architect
Right?
or somebody that owned a Mexican restaurant.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so you never got to do either of those two things. Is
You
that
know
correct?
what? I did actually. I took in high school, in the high school I went to, they had th a 3-year architectural drafting
Oh,
course, which
really?
I took.
Yeah.
And I did have a part-time I shouldn't say part-time, it was a full-time job, but it only lasted a part-time doing drafting. And that was just something I tried my hand at, and I actually enjoy it still, but didn't do that. But then I grew up kind of in the restaurant business because my dad and my uncle were both, had restaurant connection ties. My uncle more than my dad. So I went to college for, hotel, restaurant, institutional management, and that's where we met. I mean, in the business courses.
So how come you think you didn't become a design, an architecture, an
Yeah,
architect?
I could have easily. We just, did a new building here at our
Oh, that's true.
headquarters, and I laid that all out. And I didn't do the final drawings because they had to be submitted by, an architect. But I definitely, did most of the layout and design, kind of in advance to help the project get started.
And in some ways, I guess it's kind of good you didn't go into that field because boy, is that field being affected by AI. You
Yeah.
always had to do this all yourself, and now AI can do it, I guess, a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, at the end of the day, the concepts, right, are something that you would think a human has to come up with first, but the execution, is definitely going to be done more automatically, and is even today and has been for a while, right? There are a lot of drawing programs out there.
And you're saying even the concepts, but it's amazing you can plug into AI, this is what you want, this is what you're looking for, give me
Yes,
ideas.
yes,
Um,
that's all true. That's all true. But I think at the end of the day, it's like a sourdough starter, right? It just gets it gets your ideas flowing.
yeah.
It doesn't do more than that. I mean, I still believe that you need to know like the context of where the building's going to be, who it's going to serve, and more likely it's still a human that needs to put that into the AI engine. but the AI engine can then help you, with particulars such as, oh, do you want colonial? Do you want modern? Do you want postmodern? So I can see it.
And as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about the Dementia Society of America. I can see you doing that next to have next thing you'll operate a Mexican restaurant out of it,
You know what? That or hot dog stand.
hot dogs, or just with Costco, $1.50. I've never been to Costco.
Yeah, I go there just even not to shop, but just to get the hot dog.
$1.50 and a hot dog and a Coke.
Yeah.
Good deal. So back to the concept, so that Dementia Society of America. Well, trace us to that. So I followed your career. You were in sales, you were in marketing, you're doing lots of different things. And all of a sudden, I know the story, but if you could share it with other people that I guess you were impacted by dementia yourself. And if you just kind of tell that story, which is very,
Yes, yes. So, growing up, again, I had grandparents that were originally from New York or lived in New York, lived in Manhattan or in the suburbs of New York. And, later in their lives, they definitely, exhibited what we now call dementia, right? But people didn't talk about it like that. It was less talked about at all. And I had that experience. It was more that the person was a recluse or a hermit, or that they collected things all the time, or they just they were a character, right? A New York City character. But I ended up meeting a woman in 1982. Her name was Ginny, and we met on a dance floor not too far from where I live now. And, we had just a great relationship. We got married. She had two kids. And, we were married, easily 20 years before I started to see a change in her, almost a very rapid change over a short amount of time, months, maybe 1 or 2 years. And the changes were that she went from being bubbly and vivacious to being caustic and angry. And I wasn't sure what was going on. And it actually led me to say to her, "Hey, let's go and get some marriage counseling," which we did. And the marriage counselor, whose office is just a block from me now, pulled me aside and said, Kevin, something's going on with Ginny. I know that you love each other, but I can't put my finger on what's going on. And I really didn't know what to do or where to go with that. So, we just kind of muddled along. And then one night we went out to dinner, and we went to a restaurant we'd been to before. We walked in. I said hello to the hostess by name. And Ginny said, how do you know her? And I said, well, from last time we were here, she has an interesting name. I usually ask the name of the host or hostess or the waiter. And she goes, well, I've never been here before. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We were here last month, in fact. I can tell you what we ate, where we sat. I'll get a receipt out from the credit card company. No, nothing would convince her. And she said, you must have been there with another woman. And I'm like, wow, wow, wow. So at that moment, I knew that it wasn't necessarily a marriage challenge as much as a cognitive challenge. There was something going on with Ginny cognitively. And that really started me on this you know, investigative journey to understand what it was.
now,
You know,
Kevin,
what's
if I can jump in there, because I want you to talk about the process that when you see that in somebody, be it Jenny or anybody else, it must be tough, and you and I have discussed this, to then bring it to the person's attention and then have him or her want to do something about it. Like,
right.
so you saw this in Jenny, the person gave you a hint, which is kind of cool, the marriage counselor. So how do you then get it from there to the point where Jenny did get evaluated?
It took a couple of years to
Wow.
get the kind of evaluation that was helpful and meaningful. I mean, along the steps along the way are what a lot of people go through. They may end up in counseling. They may end up divorced, for God's sakes, right? But she was resistant to getting tested because she wasn't self-aware. But I shared a doctor with her, and I spoke to the doctor, and then ultimately had to write to the doctor to say, there's something going on with Jen, and I really need her checked out. and it began as kind of like anxiety, depression, and so forth. So let's get her to see a psychologist, then a psychiatrist, and all of that didn't make sense. It wasn't, they were giving drugs that were not necessarily helpful to her at the time. Maybe a little helpful, but not a lot. And then it was, well, let's get her into a neurologist. And it was a local neurologist, nothing wrong with that. It was a starting point, but he wasn't a specialist in cognition. And neurologists, even though they sound like a specialist, there's general neurology, and then there's neurologists that specialize in neurocognitive issues. So this took time, right? Getting appointments, following up, trying to figure out what's going on, and all the while, Ginny started to have additional issues crop up, getting lost or getting putting things in a wrong place, or extra caustic comments. And I just started to write all these things down, and then started to share them with her doctor so that it would elevate his concern, because he really wasn't concerned initially. It was like, well, she's getting older, aren't we all? And this may be normal and so forth. But I knew it wasn't normal. And so I really just kept pressing. And finally, I had a list of, 30, 40, 50 things, and the doctor couldn't ignore it. And we ended up getting into, a university setting, a medical hospital near to us that, had a neurology group that specialized in brain health and cognition. And that's where we started to get some traction with the testing.
Back that up, Kevin, because I think you're giving anybody who's listening to this really good advice. And that's, I guess, one of the first things to do, that if you notice something in somebody else, I guess you can ask the person, but, and you and I have talked about this, I guess sometimes he or she is going to be resistant to what you're asking. But so next step would be to actually keep a diary of this, keep a record of this.
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of the things that really made the difference for me anyway. And I often, when I talk with people, like in a group setting and I'm making a presentation, it's one of the things that I really press people to do is to, kind of time, date, stamp in detail what was said or done that was out of the norm, right? It wasn't their normal habit or action or way of speaking or personality, or just, something happened that was out of the normal for them. And that really helped.
Now, after you making this list, at some point in time, you said in your case took a couple months. What do you then do with that list in terms of who do you next speak to, aside from the
Well,
Dementia Society of America? We'll talk about that.
I mean, you really do need to take it to your frontline, healthcare provider, and push and push and push, because there are lots of things that are not dementia. So that's an important concept to understand, because everybody thinks, well, first of all, people think that dementia is a disease. And it's one of the number one myths, because it's not a disease, it's a syndrome. Dementia is a syndrome, which means it's a collection of symptoms, and those symptoms get progressively worse, and there is no meaningful cure or treatment. That really is the textbook definition of a syndrome. And so, what's underlying the syndrome of dementia? What's causing somebody to have memory loss, personality change, behavioral issues, walking difficulties, word finding, and so forth? Well, that's more of a pathology in the brain, and the brain tissue is changing, and what's causing the change. And that's where you get into things like saying, oh, maybe it's Alzheimer's disease, maybe it's vascular or cerebrovascular disease, like mini strokes, maybe it's frontotemporal dementia, maybe it's Lewy body dementia, maybe it's CTE, which is what some of the football players get from concussions. So, that's where you want to go with it ultimately, if you can, but it depends on the person's age and ability to withstand testing. There's so many factors that go into it. Ginny was relatively young, and her cause of her dementia, is probably, at least the triggering cause, was a major head injury she sustained, you know, early in the process, that I didn't connect the dots, and of course, neither did she.
Do you remember the head incident? Was that an accident?
Yes, yes, she got T-boned in an intersection.
Okay. It's funny you're saying this, Kevin, and I'm thinking about a show I'm watching. I think I gave you the recommendation, Nurse Jackie. But
Right?
there's a whole scene on that where the administrator showing all the signs of dementia, and I'm thinking of you. And it turns out that it was some other medical condition that they were able to deal with. But
Precisely.
they didn't know it until they did all these tests or something. So you eventually got to the doctor, you eventually got to some specialists. Where did it go from there?
Yeah, well, just to back up on that, there are a lot of things that cause cognitive impairment. And cognitive impairment, if it's not severe, right, if it's minor, you have a personality change, but it's minor. You have your word finding issues, but it's minor. You have trouble remembering things, but it's minor. That can come from depression. That can come from hormone imbalances. That can come from an infection, like a urinary tract infection. That can come from any number of additional assaults to our brains, and that's why you need to get in to get checked as quickly as possible, as early as possible, so that you can eliminate and treat something that's treatable.
So you did that. What then happened?
So ultimately, Ginny, got the appointment, but it's not just one appointment. When you
Oh,
go to this type of, cognitive workup, it's a multi-month series of tests. And generally, what they do is they give you what's called a neuropsych exam, which is an exhaustive exam, and then they test that very same set of tests 6 months later, so they can see if you're changing, number one. Now, keep in mind, this was 25 years ago, or almost 25 years ago. And the diagnostic tools that we have today weren't available then to the general public. So today there are a lot more diagnostic tools, MRIs, CAT scans, PET scans, cerebral spinal fluid tests, blood tests, skin tests. They're developing eye tests. They have tests that they can use a smartphone to help determine whether somebody's declining or not. So there are a lot of things that are happening today that didn't exist to the general public 25 years ago. So it's a whole new world in terms of diagnostics.
was Ginny resistant to all these tests and
Um,
evaluations?
Maybe initially, of course, but I think, at some level she understood there was a difficulty. And I think that I was persistent enough to convince her that there was an issue she needed to pay attention to. And that was it was a culmination of things really. But I think she got, you know, I think a lot of people at some level understand that they're having difficulty. It's just hard to process.
So you go through all this. If you would then fast forward from there, and Jenny eventually, you know, didn't get better. She got worse. She passed. Go from there to then what led to the formation of the Dementia Society of America.
Right. Well, I'd spent, 35 years in the sales and marketing of alarm equipment. And I worked for some major corporations. I had my own business. But at the end of the day, I'd gone through this trajectory of care with Ginny, which lasted probably, about 10 years, give or take. And so when we got to the point where she entered hospice, I really didn't want to travel as much anymore because my job was really, involved a lot of traveling. So I decided to, basically retire. I took family leave, and then family leave wasn't enough. She entered hospice, and I knew that she was probably going to last a little bit longer, so I just decided to retire and in so doing care for her. And then I looked around and said, okay, I have all this knowledge about dementia, and most people are unaware of what dementia is and isn't. Most people think it's all Alzheimer's disease when
Right.
it's not. And even the nature of Alzheimer's has changed significantly in the last 10 to 20 years. So, what could I do? How could I help other people? And that's where, the organization got its start.
And that was when.
2013 is the first time I, registered to be a nonprofit.
Okay. And that's, I remember kind of back in those early days, you've grown just a little bit since 2013.
Yeah.
Remember, what was it? One of the first fundraisers was a dance, right? You
Yes.
went to dances
Yes, against dementia. Yes.
and pass the hat. So, I mean, that's 2013. Now it's 12 years. When you got it, then what led to it taking off when you eventually got your own facility, or when would you say it jumped from there to where you are now?
Well, I mean, I think it was a very slow, if you look at the growth of what we've done, it's been, very measured every year. I mean, there have been a couple of like wow moments where people have just been so generous and helped us financially. But for the most part, it's just that we've gotten in front of more and more people and coupled up with the fact that more and more people are aware of dementia and that the aging population, the baby boomers, are right in the thick of their peak. And so as they enter their 70s and 80s, although dementia is not necessarily a condition of only older age or elders, even there's a childhood type of dementia, but certainly young people get forms of dementia, those that play football, hockey, things like that. Um, so, it was just like this huge awareness, and there was still a lack of education out there for people. And we just happened to fill that niche. And now it's no longer a niche, but at the time it was like, okay, so how does the Dementia Society differentiate itself from another organization that might be out there? And what we did is really differentiate ourselves by focusing on the syndrome part, the things that you and I interface with, the memory loss, the activities of daily living and inability to do them, the personality changes, and helping families and individuals understand how to cope with those changes. And instead of being laser focused on one particular cause, like Alzheimer's or Lewy body or vascular, we said, hey, it doesn't matter what the cause is. If somebody has dementia, we can help them.
That's one of the things that always impressed me, Kevin, with the work you do and with the Dementia Society of America, is I see it you having two major things you're involved in. As you said, the education, and we'll just do an aside there. So in terms of education, if people want to get more information about dementia, they can contact the Dementia Society of America. What, how do they contact them, and then what kind of information can they get?
Yep. So we have a couple different ways. Most people come in on our website, which is dementiasociety.org. And you'll come right to our website, and there's a lot of information on the website. However, if you want to request a package of information to be sent to you, you go to our contact page and fill the form out, and we'll send you a complete package of information. It's not just a trifold brochure, it's a pretty thick package of information. So it's a lot to take in, but it's the right kind of education people need, especially at the outset of when they're experiencing dementia in their lives in some form or fashion.
And the nice thing about this information, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no charge to that. Is that
No,
correct?
it's completely free. Everything
Okay.
is free.
So, as a first step, one of the things we'll encourage people to do is contact the Dementia Society of America, just get information on what to do next. Also, I'm very impressed with the fact that there's a coverage that if you call in or contact them, you're going to actually speak to a person.
Well, it depends. I mean, we do have a phone number too, 1-800 dementia. It's kind of like 1-800 flowers, but a little different.
All right.
And there's a story behind that too. I wanted a toll-free number that spelled dementia. I mean, that's, 1-800, that's what you want.
Right.
And that took me a couple of years to get. A company had the number, didn't know what they had because they were using it for some computerized service out there. And I just was very persistent and finally got them to gift us the phone
Oh,
number.
really? Because
Yeah.
I remember the first time I ever saw that, I think I told you I wanted to get blainegreenfield.com or something, and they wanted like $10,000 for that, which is a bargain at the time.
Well, given who you are and your stature.
So anyway, so they can call in to you folks, they can get the information, they can also speak to somebody. If they speak to somebody, what happens? Or they get questions answered, or what's the
Yeah.
value of the call?
I mean, we try to direct everybody to come in through our contact page because It's just a lot easier to share links to other information and answer people's questions in a time shift, because we're thinly staffed, right? So it's not like we've got people sitting around, answering the phone all day. But we take the calls, they come in, they get recorded, and then we transcribe those calls and we get the information to the people that they're looking for.
And the nice thing about it, to your credit, you get the information to them very quickly. It's just,
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
very next week, everything goes out.
no, I was always impressed that the few times you go away, like even for a week, you're great on that. You want that calls manned, or at least people responding to the calls, so they'll get the information. The other thing I think is to your credit with the Dementia Society of America is so that's one component, but then you have another component which I think is great. It's the whole idea of making, I don't know, life easier for people with dementia, but providing them meaningful experiences or talk about how it involves the entertainment aspect of what you do.
Yeah, so we have a program that we started right at the outset called Ginny Gives, so named in honor of Ginny. And Ginny Gives and it's evolved over the years. We used to give out very small, $100 grants to people that were doing work in non-medical fields, so music, art, movement, and touch. So they could be bringing in a program to a care community. They could be, developing some type of, specialized tool for caregivers. Whatever it is, these are all non-medical things, right? They're not pharmaceuticals, in other words. And so what we were able to do though over the years is grow those awards, and now we have Ginny Gives Awards that happens every year, and the big prize is like $10,000. So, we've really been able to grow that portion of it. And we know that music and art and movement and touch, just simply holding somebody's hand and hopefully maybe doing it while you dance, even in a chair, dancing in a chair with them or putting music on. These are things that touch people and reach people deeply. And even in the throes of the most advanced dementia, people they still have emotions. They can still feel what's going on. And oftentimes, somebody who can't speak or say a complete sentence can sing an entire song.
And
So that's positive for me.
very much so. So those go to then actually organizations putting on these kinds of programs?
Yes, we only work with nonprofit organizations when we do that.
Okay. So if anybody's interested or the nonprofit would then get involved in this program and go to the website and get information about it. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we have like an annual like open enrollment or open application time, and that starts in the fall. So, yeah, if they go to ginnygives.org, that's kind of a web link that'll take them directly to the Ginny Gives Awards page. But yeah, once a year we open up the window, we accept applications, and then we give the awards out, at the end of the year.
And we should mention one other aspect of the association, which I forgot, but you also recently started giving grants to people doing research on dementia.
That's right. We have a pretty significant medical or research-based program, and we have partnered with a medical advisory council. And what they do is they seek out seed grant researchers who want seed grants. So these researchers are doing specialized research in, very niche areas of the dementia space, and who knows whether it's going to take off or not. What they think is what they're going to come up with is going to, revolutionize things. We don't know, but they need, like funding for that early seed work that they do, so that maybe a larger foundation or a government organization can come along and give them big money. So we might give $100,000 to a researcher to, set up their lab and, get their seed work going up front. But then if they prove that they have a good theory about what they're working on, then they can apply for larger grants. So we're kind of that, starting point for them.
You mentioned the starting point, but for the person getting the grant, I imagine it's very exciting, and to just
Oh yeah.
to
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
read about it's great. And Kevin, as we kind of wind down here, I have to hit you on just a couple other things. One is if anybody's listening to this, so you've gotten some information on dementia, but how do you tell then, you back to your story with Jenny or anybody else going through this, that somebody might need assistance or might need to get further study? What are some of the telltale symptoms to find or to look for?
Well, I mean, if somebody's fumbling for words and they don't normally do it, I mean, obviously, when you're speaking to somebody, you're going to fumble a word here or there. That's kind of normal. Yeah, I mean, it's normal human behavior. But if you are talking about a soccer ball and you're getting one for your grandson and you're explaining it to somebody and you can't come up with soccer ball, but you say that round black and white thing, that's a concern. It can happen because of stress and depression that can't process that right away. But if it happens over and over again, you got to be watching for that. Putting things in odd places, taking bed sheets and putting them in the china cupboard, right? Or putting keys to your car in the refrigerator. I mean, these are all kind of things that are not normal. People would say, no, that's something they wouldn't normally do. Um, Also repeating. So if somebody repeats themselves, and we're not talking about like, hey, I think I told you this story. You know the old joke where they just call out a number and everybody laughs, right? But the old story, but if you repeat something and then 5 minutes later you're repeating it again, 5 minutes later you're repeating it again, 5 minutes later you're repeating it again. Again, if that's not normal, and for most people it wouldn't be, that's a sign as well. And we actually call these clues. And we have something called the 22 clues to dementia. And they're all on our website. People can find them, the 22 clues. And it's a large spread, kind of a double wide spread of a magazine we call the Big Umbrella. And the Big Umbrella is a 16-page booklet. You open it up, and all those clues are listed for you.
By the way, I forgot to mention too, you mentioned the magazine. Something else very exciting within the last, I guess, 2 years or so. You actually now have a magazine from the Dementia Society of America.
Yes, yeah, Better Brain Nation magazine,
And
and that's really focused on brain health.
how do people get that?
Yeah, they just go to our website on our homepage. There's a cover for one of the issues of the magazine. They just click on that. They can read the magazine online, or they can sign up for, a subscription where we'll mail it to them.
Okay, very nice. And yeah, it's a very informative magazine. And are the past issues online also?
Yeah, everything is online.
Okay, past issues definitely worth getting. So you see people going through these changes, if you will, or I like how you call it clues. At that point in time, then get to your primary physician. That's what you should do.
I think that's a really good first start. I mean, people do typically take other kind of more incremental steps, and you can go ahead and sneeze.
Thank you.
Uh, but one of so I'll give a great example, AARP. I love AARP for a lot of reasons, but they do have a brain health section on their website. And if you're an AARP member, you go into this brain health section of their site, and you can do kind of brain health kind of exercises. They're not really exercises as much. They'll ask you to like follow the number like 1A, 2B, 3C. So you'll have to move and enter information on the screen, and what that does, it's just a checkup from the neck up. It's like, how do I appear um, versus my peers in doing that type of activity? If all of my peers are getting the answer to the activity in a certain amount of time at a certain level, well, how am I doing compared to the peers? And I think if you come out of that and say, well, wait a minute, I'm having a bit of a deficit, compared with my peers, I think that would be a concern. Certainly, if you're at the level of your peers or better, it's a nice to know, but it doesn't prove anything.
What about the tests that doctors do? I think it's part of Medicare. You get the check. that you have to remember. It used to be, I thought, five statements. Now they're down to three, Kevin, which is, um, and they do it very superficially. It's unfortunate. But what about that test where you ask to remember, you given three statements, five statements, and then 5 minutes later you ask to repeat them? Is there
Right. Like pear, apple, table, right?
any validity to that?
Um, sure. I mean, it's a screening tool, and people will do a combination of things, and there are official screening screeners out there that physicians use. Uh, and they go by different names. Some of them, or most of them, are called for short mini mentals,
Right.
but basically it's anywhere from 10 to 20 questions. Generally has like a 30-point score, and it can include a number of things. Not only, let me give you three words to remember, but also count back from 100 by seven, and who's the president, and what's the day of the week, and oh, by the way, draw a clock on this piece of paper and put the hands at 10 after 11.
Yeah, it's funny. They never change that. It's always 10 after 11.
Well, it is, but it's one of the best screening
Is it?
tools out there.
Excepting, Kevin, I wonder in 20 years from now that people have never even seen a clock, will they?
Oh, I get it. I get it. Uh, but at the end of the day, a lot of people, at least older adults, know what a clock face looks like. And doing that involves a number of regions of your brain, right? You have to understand what a clock is. You have to understand what hands are. You have to understand what time is. You have to understand the sequence of numbers. You have to understand how to make a circle. It's all of those things that go into that screening tool, and it's pretty powerful.
I don't know if I told you the story, but I was annoyed with I saw a neurologist several years ago about some balance issues. And then one test, and you may know it, you had to list like 25, excuse me, you had to list as many fruits as you could in 10 in a minute. Have you ever
Yeah.
seen that?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But anyway, so I said coconut. Did I tell you the story?
No.
I thought it did. And the guy said, no, that's not coconut. That's a vegetable. I said, no, it's a fruit. And so, me, I went home, researched on the internet, wrote him a letter back saying, I want to retest or I want to reevaluate my grade. He never responded. I was always annoyed.
Well, you'd probably get it if you said tomato, right? Because it's
Right.
a fruit.
Same thing too. But he started arguing with me. He says, no, you're wrong on that. I said, well, I'm right. And he didn't agree with me. Kevin, to wrap up, two questions. One, where do you see the association going from now, say, the next 10 years?
I mean, I see nothing but kind of an up in terms of, trajectory. Again, we're living in that era where a lot of the baby boomers are in the thick of growing older, and it's normal in this sense that older adults are more likely to have a dementia of some kind. There is some age-related change that happens, right? That's just a fact. What we want to look for are things that are out of the normal. So in terms of getting people aware of what dementia is and isn't, I think like in the same way that cancer has become easy to talk about or easier to talk about. If somebody says, I've been diagnosed with prostate cancer, they might not have said that to a friend, 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Now it's like, hey, I'm going for my biopsy tomorrow. It's like, oh, okay. So the same is true with dementia, right? It's a tough subject to talk about. There are a lot of reasons for that. It speaks to the core of who we are as an individual when our cognition is challenged. But the more we can talk about it, the better. And so I believe our job, won't be done for years and years and years because it's human nature to kind of bury your head in the sand with certain things. And the more fearful you are about a certain topic, the more likely you are to do that. So our goal is to get out in front of that, speak very boldly, very openly, very accurately, and then give people the educational tools and the caregiver tools so that they can start to make smarter decisions and get ahead of things. Don't wait for the emergency.
And one final question about getting ahead of things. Explain, if you would, Kevin, or is there a tie-in between dementia and hearing? Because a lot of people fight that as well. It's a very common thing, older people, hearing's bad or whatnot. But is there a relationship between hearing and dementia?
Yeah, so it's a complex relationship, and I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not a researcher myself, but I've read enough and I understand enough give you a little bit of feedback on that. So how does hearing loss affect us? And in fact, it's not just hearing loss. It's changes in the sense of smell. It's changes in our eyesight. It's changes in our touch. These are all sensory organs, right? These are bringing sensory information into our brains. And the less sensory information you have going into your brain, the less your brain gets exercised. So if you think about a developing condition, what they've shown is that people can build their cognitive reserve, their neuroplasticity, which are two key ingredients to this, when they stimulate themselves through interactions with others, including listening to people and hearing people. So if you're not hearing all the information, number one, you may not remember it because you never heard it.
Good point.
But number two, if you don't hear it, you're not stimulating your brain to process it. And by doing so, you're kind of dumbing down your brain. And in that dumbing down process, you're not necessarily building a robust cognition, you're reducing your abilities at cognition. So hearing loss is tricky. It's not like hearing loss causes Alzheimer's. That would be a bridge too far right now. We don't really think of it that way. What we say is that if somebody is living with or predisposed to a Lewy body or a vascular dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever, what are they doing for their brain that either negatively impacts the brain or positively impacts the brain? Because they've shown that people can have the pathology of an Alzheimer's, of a Lewy body, of a vascular, of a frontotemporal, and not exhibit dementia. And that's because those people have deep cognitive reserve and lots of neuroplasticity, and sensory input helps keep your brain active. And when you keep your brain active, the neurons are firing and they're building and they're staying alive longer. So it's just a matter of the fact that when you have hearing loss, it's negatively impacting the stimulation of your brain and your neurons, and that allows other things to impact your brain more negatively, such as an underlying pathology of a disease.
Good stuff, Kevin. And so to just wrap up to remind everybody, if they want to get a handle on some of this information, best step is to go to dementiasocietyofamerica.org. It's a
Yeah, it's
website.
just dementiasociety.org.
Okay. And I'd like to thank you for being my guest this edition of Blaine's World webcast. Also, I'd like to thank my producer, Cappy Cassetti, and I'll hope to see you sometime, hopefully in the next couple of years, buddy. That'd be
Okay,
great.
hey, be well.
Thanks.